Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. In my two previous videos, I went over my rewrite of the Battle for Azeroth expansion and made the quite obvious choice to delay Nazjatar and Ny'alotha for a future expansion. I've always considered them to have way more potential than what they got, which was the larger half of a single patch for the former and a single raid for the latter. Quite the opposite. I think that, at least together, they hold the potential for an entire expansion. Arguably two, though that might get to feeling a bit drug out. This is my video covering that expansion concept, although I expect it'll be significantly shorter than my BFA coverage for a simple reason. Those videos were working with a lot of established story beats and modifying them. There's a whole lot less already going on with the Nazjatar and Ny'alotha content. And in the grand scheme of things, they really didn't have much impact on the plot whatsoever. So we've got a lot of blank space that can serve any purpose we want it to, as long as it doesn't derail us too much. But that largely falls outside of my interests and arguable skill set. This is where you get the big world building guys like Metzen to come in and come up with a bunch of Nazjatari subcultures and microhistories and zone maps to really flesh the place out, and zone quest designers to come in and write a bunch of short stories. So ultimately, I'm going to be sticking primarily to the very vague, very major story beats. Prior to her actual proper appearance in WoW, I'd always envisioned the Azara expansion beginning with her magically raising Nazjatar from the sea. This could potentially cause tsunamis that strike against Azeroth's other landmasses as an opening attack, though that's really just an afterthought. Of course, in BFA, what we actually got was her using the Tidestone of Golganeth to part the sea and have us fall down into it. I'm fine with this approach as well, and it did add the potential threat of her just dropping the ocean back down on us at any point. However, I feel like being surrounded by waterfalls for the entirety of the expansion could get tiring. So I'd probably go with the raising idea, and there could be a single zone or subzone where you do the parting concept instead. And of course, we're expanding Nazjatar to be an entire proper continent instead of one mid-sized zone, as most players agree that it was a ton of wasted potential. Now, I'm not an environment designer, but I feel like the whole dang ocean provides a lot of material to work with. Trenches, coral fields, heck, there could even be coral people, a more beach-like zone, and a lot more that people smarter than me can figure out. WoW's zone art is consistently praised as a strong point, so I have faith that they could come up with plenty. And that's in addition to what we did get, which was really good. Just not enough. Heck, even Vashir gave us enough diversity to create 3 zones. So Azara raises Nazjatar and issues her challenge to both the Horde and the Alliance, which naturally respond as, left unchecked, she could represent an existential threat. The Alliance's effort is spearheaded by the Night Elves, who obviously have the most history with Azara. This also helps make up for all of the focus that I took away from them by removing them as a focus in Battle for Azeroth. The Horde's effort is spearheaded by the Nightborn, possibly with Blood Elf support as well. I know that I removed Nightborn as an allied race since they don't feel culturally distinct enough from Blood Elves, but they can still be a valuable asset to the Horde. Or heck, maybe they become playable now despite that, though that begs the question what the Alliance gets. And Cohen, regular Jinyu? Seems weird to get them and not Hosen for the Horde. Naga, or Naga but with legs? Seems like it'd be way more effort than what the Horde would be getting. I don't know. My version doesn't add any races now, but that's not to say that it couldn't be done either. But what we do get here are Tinkers. Tinkers fit very well in any sort of aquatic expansion, I feel, as you can sort of lean into steampunk elements quite well. And they're just a normal class, not some sort of super soldier of a former expansion villain like Garrosh. I suppose those would just be the Kor'kron, huh? Anyway, yeah, they're just there. Maybe Gazlo and Erasmin get some shine too, since even though Tinker works for many other races, goblins and gnomes are obviously the most emblematic. So, we arrive in Nazjatar, prepared to fight for a foothold. Thankfully, we stumble across some endemic life that is none too friendly to the Naga Queen, and which is willing to provide a shelter in our new capital city. This could be Angkoan, Gil Goblins, a rebel Naga populace, or any other species Blizzard dreams up. At any rate, though they were happy to host us, they won't abide any violence in their city, so it serves as a sanctuary. That doesn't mean things have to be completely peaceful across the whole continent, though. Perhaps the Night Elves are none too happy about the Nightborn siding with the Horde, or think that they can't be trusted. At any rate, we have all of our localized zone quest chains, which could be really anything. I do think it'd be a nice touch to get glimpses of Azshara's youth and rise to power and formation of her empire. A bit of a biopic showing the development of her narcissism and her willingness to make any sacrifice to obtain and maintain the sovereignty she craves. Now, I basically cut Azeroth out as a plot device during the BFA rewrite. However, I'm going to bring it back here for a few reasons. Firstly, it may be somewhat relevant to future plots in WoW. I mean, probably not. It was mostly just unobtainium to motivate characters in BFA, but it does seem to be similar to the World Soul coalescences like Beladar and Himosul. Obviously, since, it's basically the blood of Azeroth, and it's even persisted in its use, although greatly scaled back, as it is the Earthen allied race's active racial ability. I also want to use it for a few points in my Azshara expansion, so maybe the existence of Azeroth is hinted at in the previous expansion, but it isn't until now that Magni summons us and asks for our help collecting it to heal the planet. But it wouldn't really function as a resource to collect, and more importantly, it's not going to be particularly useful for weaponry. I mean, to an extent, sure, but aside from functioning as Azeroth's blood, its primary use is to very, very efficiently power Titan devices and facilities, which makes sense to me since, barring any plot twists, Azeroth herself is a Titan. Actually, I may regret that thought because it's seeming more and more likely that Azeroth is some sort of neutral entity and would only become a Titan if influenced by the forces of order. But we could also just say that the Titans designed their machinery to operate more efficiently off of Azeroth anyway. Anyway, the dungeons and raids could be any number of things. My personal nomination for the 9.0 raid would be the Abyssal Maw raid that we never got back in Cataclysm. Of course, Neptulon was explained to have escaped from Ozumat and the Naga on his own in Legion, which was a writing choice, but perhaps they're at it again. Or heck, perhaps Neptulon himself is antagonistic against us now. We know how capricious the Elemental Lords can be. Smolderon tried to help Farak, and the Earthen Ring literally helped him become the Fire Lord in the first place. And though I would love to have to travel back to the bottom of the Abyssal Maw to access the raid, I'm sure many would find that stupid for the first raid of an expansion, so you could put the entrance in Nazjatar instead. Doesn't really matter. Patch 9.1 would give us a bit of a reprieve from Nazjatar. The Horde has determined that the resources present on the now restored islands of Kazan and the Lost Isles would prove invaluable to their war efforts against Azshara and the Alliance. Gallywix and the Bilgewater Cartel of course spearhead the reclamation effort. This would, in theory, be when goblins get their own proper capital city to balance out Gilneas. Granted, this becomes a bit more complicated if we want to preserve Undermine as the 11.1 patch of The War Within. You wouldn't really want to use the zone itself already, and I can understand wanting to keep that as a space for all cartels, Horde or not, to operate in. So maybe we just build another Bilgewater specific city topside? At any rate, the Alliance needs to have stuff to do here as well, so maybe they're collaborating with one of the neutral cartels. Heck, we know Renzik the Shiv, an Alliance goblin, used to work for the Crackslayer cartel, and while he probably doesn't feel too positively about its trade prince Mozzie Glockscorn nowadays, it is a cartel that doesn't actually appear in patch 11.1, leaving it ripe for use. They show up to try to sneak any resources away from the Bilgewater that they can. Also, I mentioned probably cutting the Motherlode as a BFA dungeon because it felt really weird sailing to the place. Well, now is when we can have it finally implemented as a patch dungeon, and we actually care about Azeroth again, so that works out. I don't really know what we'd do for a raid. There's no important location that needs to be dealt with, so something on Kazan or the Lost Isles could work. Or something else in Nazjatar, or even something in the Old World. I'm always a fan of adding dungeons and raids to former continents. Patch 9.2 would return our attention to Nazjatar, specifically to its darkest depths. In Old God tradition, we'll be dealing with N'Zoth as a mid-expansion raid boss. I know Blizzard's handling of N'Zoth gets a lot of flack because he got so much build-up and wound up being killed off without doing anything interesting. But part of the problem was setting him up as the end boss of the expansion, which we don't have to worry about here. I'd also have him get way more character exploration here, at least as much as an Old God can. I just think Azshara is an altogether more interesting figure to carry an expansion and more deserving of the status. So then, we go to the lowest point in Nazjatar, to Ny'alotha. Ny'alotha sort of became the Old God realm that heavily mirrored our images of the Black Empire, but prior to 8.3, our understanding of it was a bit different, at least mine was. I always thought of it as specifically N'Zoth's territory. an underwater domain / prison. So that's what we're getting here, with Ny'alotha serving as the patch zone. N'alotha's prison specifically would serve as a raid within that zone. And we're going full thalassophobia here. Dark, vacuous waters, deep sea gigantism. We could still have the massive temple filled with cultists. We could even throw in Il'gynoth's aperture somewhere if we really want. But I really want more aquatic elements. More elements of madness, like narrow, twisting, labyrinthian corridors. Maybe as we approach the bottom, we get some ominous chanting as part of the background music. Finally, we face off against the Corruptor himself, and succeed in vanquishing the old god. Though we ultimately discover that we didn't actually kill him. What we really did was banish him back to the realm of the void. Now, for my story, we don't have to treat Cthulhu and Yogg-Saron the same way. We can just have them be dead, or likewise banished. It doesn't matter. But N'alotha, he's banished. Azshara is as visibly shook as she ever has been. She never expected N'alotha would allow himself to be defeated by such gnats, and it's thrown her plans into disarray. He was a pivotal part of her plan to become queen of all of Azeroth. Of course, she could still do it on her own, obviously, but nevertheless, she is chagrined. And so, we get our second patch dungeon, which I'm just going to call the Umbral Vault. Azshara sends one of her trusted servants to infiltrate a mysterious Titan facility, and we're dispatched to thwart their efforts. Although we do defeat them and prevent most of the location's artifacts from being stolen, the Naga are able to get away with one device in particular. In patch 9.3, we finally face off against Azshara herself in her Eternal Palace, which I'm just going to say right off the bat is going to have a very different feel from what we got in the actual patch 8.2. Don't get me wrong, it was a good raid, but it never really felt like the palace where Azeroth's most vain ruler would choose to spend 10,000 years. It felt far too barren and militaristic. I want her palace to be lavish and resplendent, with facilities that would actually be used instead of just massive, spacious chambers. She should have lavish gardens. Heck, stick one of those Coral Ancients in as a boss. There should be a dedicated theater section where we get a lot of what was used in Phase 1 of Azshara's actual fight. And, most importantly, an actual throne room. Most of the original bosses from Eternal Palace could still function here, including Ashvane, or they could be used elsewhere. None of them are terribly important. At any rate, we at last take the fight to Azshara directly, and she's nearly finished powering up the Titan device that she stole. We're still not sure what exactly its purpose is, but we know it can't be good. The fight would showcase a lot more of Azshara's mastery over magic, but would possibly still feature the original element of us needing to utilize Azerite to counter certain abilities. Although that bit's kind of optional. She could simply be wrapping up the work of doing it herself. We fight valiantly, but are ultimately unable to stop her from powering the device. She activates it to reveal a portal to the Void Realm, whatever that's going to be called. She thanks us for this entertaining performance before taking her leave and disappearing from Azeroth, possibly forever. At this point, you're probably wondering what the heck happened, and so would our heroes. If you watched my crack ship video a while ago, you may have pieced it together already. But basically, instead of her and N'alotha being antagonistic toward each other, I'd have them actually have developed a bond. I mean, they can still be antagonistic at the same time. I'd enjoy a very love-hate dynamic. But once we banished N'alotha, Azshara came to truly realize how much she cared about him. And knowing that she can no longer have both him and her rule over Azeroth, she makes a difficult choice. For the first time in her life, she chooses the option that isn't her being a queen. Thus, she retrieves the Titan device that can open a portal to the Void, so that she can go be with him. In the final cutscene, after we see her step through, she emerges on the other side and is greeted by N'alotha. "The things I do for love," she sighs, lamenting the sacrifice she had to make, her empire for a fish. And perhaps we'd see them again if we ever travel to the Void Realm. But we wouldn't have to. I'd be perfectly content with this being the end of Azshara's story. I like it because it's a lot more interesting than she tries to take over the world and we kill her. And because it'd be a rare case of us actually losing the final fight of an expansion, which is usually avoided because it'd be very hard to depict the consequences of that in-game. But I know lots of people would just want to kill her, and probably very few people like the idea of an Azshara and N'alotha ship. My version is certainly not the only version of a Nazjatar expansion that would be enjoyable. there are a ton of possibilities that could have been explored. I just find it a real shame that all of those were abandoned for the little bit of content that they did use them for. At any rate, Azshara and N'Zoth both deserved far more from this game, and I hope you were at least able to enjoy listening to my pitch. We've got one more episode left in this rewrite series, so stay tuned for that. For this week's drawing, I had to go, of course, with no one else but the Queen Beneath the Tides herself, Azshara. I know I've definitely alluded to it in the past, but just to make it absolutely clear here, Azshara is my favorite character from Warcraft. I love how absolutely full of herself she is, and that she's willing to sacrifice anything it takes to achieve what she wants. In a franchise filled to the brim with characters who are constantly questioning their own worth, it's incredibly refreshing to have a character who already knows that she is perfect. A belief she holds so firmly that I suspect she's actually autosexual. I mean, did you see the way she was looking at her reflection in that waterfall? And that's really a thing that does not get depicted in media, like, at all. And yeah, I just love that there is no end to her arrogance. She intended to marry Sargeras, for goodness sake. And she was completely willing to play hardball in her bargain with N'Zoth while she was drowning to death, because she would literally rather die than not be a queen. You've gotta respect that. And I also love that she's voiced by Laura Post, who also does Ragio in Kill la Kill, who has a ton of character overlap with Azshara, and who is probably my favorite Kill la Kill character. As for the actual drawing, I think Azshara herself went pretty smoothly. Where I was really floundering was the background, simply because I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with it. Because of the changes I wanted to make to the Eternal Palace raid, I didn't just want to place her in the Circle of Stars, especially since I already used those head statues for the Ny'alotha concept I drew for N'Zoth. And I wanted her setting to be a lot more luscious and vibrant, so immediately I thought of those coral fields out in Nazjatar itself. But I wasn't going to set her out in the middle of nowhere, so I had to give her a stage or throne of some sort. And for a while I was considering doing the Nazjatar water wall in the background. Eventually I landed on just using the waterfall that's featured in the Nazjatar cutscene and in the Queen's Court fight. And yeah, it just took a lot of finagling overall to get this exactly how I wanted, which was really important to me because, again, she's my favorite character. I think off camera I worked on this for like an additional 3 hours. So if the final product looks significantly different than the last bit of my drawing footage, that's why. Anyway, I've prattled on far too long, so thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye.